The conversation was never meant to leave the room, and that was precisely why it sent such a shock through the inner circle when it did. According to sources close to both actors, Heughan and Caitriona Balfe recently allowed themselves to speak openly about a future that had long remained unspoken. The word, engagement, was not used casually, nor was it framed as fantasy. What startled those who heard about it was the calm, deliberate way 2026 was mentioned, as if it had already been quietly circled on an invisible calendar. For years, any suggestion of long-term plans between Sam and Caitriona had been dismissed as wishful thinking or fan projection. Both mastered the art of careful distance, offering warmth without confirmation and closeness without commitment. That strategy worked for a long time, protecting their privacy while keeping speculation at bay. The difference now, insiders say, is that the conversation has shifted from avoidance to intention. What makes this revelation so compelling is not the idea of engagement itself, but the timing attached to it. Choosing a year rather than an abstract someday suggests planning rather than dreaming. Sources emphasize that this was not an impulsive exchange or a moment of emotional vulnerability, but a measured discussion shaped by experience. In the world they inhabit, nothing about the future is spoken lightly. Those familiar with their dynamic describe a noticeable evolution over the past year. Sam and Caitriona have reportedly become more protective of their time, more selective about public appearances, and more aligned in their decisions. This subtle synchronization did not draw attention at first, but in hindsight, it appears deliberate. Stability, not secrecy, has become the priority. The mention of 2026 carries particular significance. It creates distance from the present, allowing space for careers, obligations, and personal boundaries to remain intact. For two people whose lives are constantly scrutinized, planning too close to the present would invite pressure neither is willing to absorb. By looking ahead, they retain control over the pace of their own story. Sources stress that this discussion does not resemble a dramatic declaration. There were no promises exchanged in public, no symbolic gestures meant to signal a shift. Instead, it was described as pragmatic, even cautious, rooted in mutual understanding rather than emotion alone. That practicality, more than romance, is what convinced insiders this conversation was genuine. The idea that such a topic was addressed at all marks a departure from the past. Silence once served as protection, a way to keep narratives from hardening into expectations. Now, silence is being used differently, not to deny possibility, but to safeguard it. Talking privately about the future does not require public acknowledgement to be real. Reactions among those who became aware of the discussion were mixed. Some expressed surprise that the relationship, long viewed as ambiguous, had reached a point where long-term commitment was even considered. Others felt a sense of inevitability, arguing that the depth of their connection made such a conversation unavoidable. What united these reactions was the sense that something had quietly shifted. What stands out is the absence of urgency. Engagement in 2026 is not framed as an endpoint, but as a possibility shaped by time and circumstance. That distance allows both Sam and Caitriona to continue living fully in the present without surrendering the future to speculation. It also reflects a shared understanding of how quickly public narratives can spiral when given too much certainty. As this chapter unfolds, the most striking element is restraint. No confirmation has been offered, no hints dropped to satisfy curiosity. The story exists entirely in the space between what is known and what is chosen to remain private. In that space, intention matters more than announcement. By the end of this first revelation, one thing becomes clear. Whether or not an engagement ever materializes, the fact that Heughan and Caitriona Balfe are discussing such a future marks a meaningful shift in itself. It suggests seriousness without spectacle, commitment without performance. And sometimes, the quiet consideration of a shared future speaks louder than any public declaration ever could. As word of the discussion began to circulate quietly, attention turned to the question everyone was asking but no one could answer directly. Why 2026, and why now? Sources suggest that the year itself was not chosen for symbolism, but for practicality. Both Heughan and Caitriona Balfe are acutely aware of how little control public figures truly have once expectations are set. By placing any potential engagement far enough in the future, they create breathing room, space where intention can exist without immediate consequence. That distance also reflects an understanding of timing learned the hard way. Over the years, both have watched speculation harden into narratives that felt impossible to correct. Rushing into clarity would invite the very pressure they have spent years avoiding. A longer horizon allows them to continue building lives that are not defined by a single personal decision. In that sense, the conversation about 2026 was as much about protection as it was about commitment. Insiders emphasize that this was not a one-sided idea or a fleeting, what if? It was described as a mutual exchange grounded in realism, shaped by careers that remain demanding and unpredictable. Projects, travel, and long-term obligations were reportedly part of the discussion, not obstacles to overcome, but realities to respect. Commitment, in this context, was framed as something to integrate carefully rather than announce impulsively. What complicates matters is the weight of expectation attached to their names. Any suggestion of engagement between Sam and Caitriona carries emotional investment far beyond that of a typical celebrity couple. Fans have followed their dynamic for years, often projecting meaning onto moments that may have been entirely ordinary. Knowing this, both actors appear determined to keep the conversation where it belongs, between themselves. The reaction from those who caught wind of the discussion has been cautiously divided. Some see the idea of engagement as confirmation that what they sensed all along was real. Others warn that even discussing future plans does not guarantee an outcome, especially under public scrutiny. The uncertainty reflects a broader truth. Planning a future does not mean it will unfold as imagined, only that it has been considered seriously. What stands out most is how deliberately low-key everything remains. There has been no attempt to shape the narrative, no subtle signals sent through interviews or appearances. That absence feels intentional, reinforcing the idea that this is not a story meant to be consumed yet. In a media landscape driven by immediacy, patience becomes a radical choice. Sources also note that both Sam and Caitriona have become more selective about what they share publicly, not just about their relationship, but about their inner lives in general. This shift suggests a growing alignment in values, where privacy is no longer defensive, but intentional. Discussing engagement privately fits naturally within that evolution. The mention of 2026 also serves another purpose. It sets expectations without locking them in. By acknowledging the possibility rather than declaring a plan, they allow flexibility for change. Life, careers, and priorities evolve, and any future commitment must evolve with them. This nuance is often lost in public conversation, but it appears central to their approach. As speculation continues, the most telling detail remains the lack of confirmation. Not because there is something to hide, but because there is something to protect. Commitment discussed in private retains its meaning. Commitment performed publicly risks becoming something else entirely. That distinction seems to guide every decision being made. In the end, the significance of this story lies not in whether an engagement happens in 2026, but in the fact that the conversation exists at all. It marks a shift from ambiguity to intention, from avoidance to consideration. For two people who have guarded their boundaries so carefully, that shift is meaningful in its own right.